Difference between Linux and Unix. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today we are going to talk about one of the most important topics in computer science and operating systems. What is the difference between Linux and Unix? You have probably heard these two names many times. Maybe you heard that Linux is based on Unix. Maybe you heard that Mac OS is Unix. Maybe you heard people say Linux is Unix-like. But what does all of that actually mean? Are Linux and Unix the same thing? Are they compatible? Why did Linux become so popular? Why are some banks and telecom systems still using Unix? In this video, we are going to explain all of that in a very simple and beginner-friendly way. In this video we are going to talk about what Unix is, what Linux is, how they were developed, how their architectures work, why they became so influential, where they are used in the real world, what their limitations are, and why Linux eventually became the dominant operating system for modern cloud infrastructure, servers, embedded systems, and AI computing. So let's begin. 1. What is an operating system? Before we compare Linux and Unix, we first need to understand what an operating system actually does. An operating system, or OS, is the software layer between applications and hardware. Without an operating system, applications cannot directly control the CPU, memory, storage devices, networking hardware, or graphics hardware safely. The operating system manages all of these resources. For example, the operating system handles process scheduling, memory management, file systems, device drivers, user accounts, security permissions, networking, input and output operations. Every time you open a web browser, save a file, or connect to the internet, the operating system is involved. Common operating systems include Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Android, Unix. Now let's look at Unix. 2. What is Unix? Unix is one of the most important operating systems ever created. Unix was developed in the late 1960s and early 1970s at Bell Labs. It was created by two legendary computer scientists, Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie. Dennis Ritchie is also famous for creating the C programming language. Unix introduced many ideas that completely changed modern computing. At the time, computers were large, expensive, and difficult to use. Unix introduced a cleaner and more modular design. Unix became extremely popular in universities, research laboratories, telecommunications systems, enterprise servers, and scientific computing environments because it offered stability, portability, multitasking, and a much cleaner software design compared to many earlier operating systems. One major reason for Unix's success was portability. Originally, operating systems were often tied to specific hardware. But Unix was rewritten in the C programming language. That meant Unix could be moved to different hardware platforms much more easily. This was revolutionary. Unix also introduced several core ideas that are still used today. 3. Unix philosophy. Unix followed a very important design philosophy. The philosophy was simple: write small programs that do one thing well. Then allow programs to work together. This is why Unix systems rely heavily on command-line tools. For example, cat log.txt grep error sort. In this example, cat reads the file. Grep searches for errors. Sort sorts the results. Each tool does one task. This modular design became one of the biggest strengths of Unix. Unix also introduced multi-user systems, multitasking, pipes and redirection, hierarchical file systems, shell scripting. These concepts later influenced Linux heavily. 4. Unix architecture. A simplified Unix architecture looks like this: user programs, shell, Unix kernel, hardware. The kernel is the core of the operating system. The Unix kernel manages CPU scheduling, processes, memory, device access, networking. File systems applications communicate with hardware through the kernel. This design became the foundation for many later operating systems. 5. BSD and System V. Over time, Unix split into multiple branches. Two major branches became very important. The first branch was BSD. BSD stands for Berkeley Software Distribution. This branch came from the University of California, Berkeley. BSD later evolved into FreeBSD, OpenBSD, NetBSD. Parts of modern macOS. The second branch was System V. This branch was developed by AT&T. System V later led to systems such as Solaris, AIX, HPUX. So when people say Unix, they may actually be referring to many different operating systems. 6. What is Linux? Now let's move to Linux. Linux was created in 1991 by Linus Torvalds as a free and open alternative inspired by Unix principles but designed to run on ordinary personal computers instead of expensive enterprise hardware. Linus was a student in Finland at the time. He wanted to create a free operating system kernel inspired by Unix. Linux was not copied from Unix source code. Instead, it was independently developed but followed Unix principles. That is why Linux is often called a Unix-like operating system. Linux quickly became popular because it was free, open source, flexible, portable, community-driven. Unlike traditional Unix systems, anyone could download Linux, modify it, and redistribute it. This completely changed the software industry. 7. Linux Architecture. Linux architecture is very similar to Unix. A simplified Linux architecture looks like this: user applications, system libraries, Linux kernel, hardware. The Linux kernel manages processes, threads, memory, networking, file systems. Device drivers. Applications communicate with hardware through the Linux kernel. 8. Linux distributions. One important thing beginners often misunderstand is this: Linux itself is only the kernel. A complete Linux operating system also includes a shell, libraries, package managers, desktop environments, applications. These complete operating systems are called Linux distributions. Popular Linux distributions include Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, Arch Linux, Linux Mint, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Each distribution targets different users. For example, Ubuntu is beginner-friendly. Arch Linux is highly customizable. Red Hat focuses on enterprise servers. Kali Linux focuses on cybersecurity. 9. Linux versus Unix. Main differences. Now let's compare Linux and Unix directly. Difference 1. Origin. Unix was developed in the 1970s at Bell Labs. Linux was created in 1991 by Linus Torvalds as a free and open alternative inspired by Unix principles but designed to run on ordinary personal computers instead of expensive enterprise hardware. Unix is older. Linux came much later. Difference 2. Source code. Traditional Unix systems are usually proprietary. That means the source code is closed. Only the vendor controls the operating system. Linux is open source. Anyone can read the source code, modify it, improve it, distribute it. This open source model helped Linux grow extremely quickly. Difference 3. Licensing. Unix systems are usually commercial products. Companies often pay expensive licensing fees. Linux is distributed under the GPL license. Most Linux distributions are free. This dramatically lowered infrastructure costs for companies. Difference 4. Development model. Unix development is usually controlled by vendors. For example, IBM controls AIX. Oracle controls Solaris. Linux development is community-driven. Thousands of developers around the world contribute to Linux. Large companies also contribute heavily, including IBM, Intel, Google, Red Hat, AMD, NVIDIA. Linux development moves much faster. Difference 5. Hardware support. Unix traditionally runs on specialized enterprise hardware. Linux runs almost everywhere. Linux supports an enormous range of hardware platforms including personal computers, enterprise servers, ARM systems, smartphones, embedded devices, supercomputers, industrial hardware, and even low-cost educational boards such as the Raspberry Pi. This flexibility helped Linux dominate modern computing. Difference 6. Cost. Unix systems are often expensive. Linux is usually free. This made Linux extremely attractive for startups, universities, developers, and cloud providers. Difference 7. Flexibility. Linux is highly customizable. Users can customize the desktop environment, kernel modules, package systems, boot systems, networking stacks. Unix systems are generally more standardized and vendor-controlled.